Brent Parton is the Principal Deputy Assistant Secretary and the Acting Assistant Secretary of the U.S. Department of Labor, Employment and Training Administration. For those of you who are coming from an ECE background, if you can imagine the Department of Health and Human Services, under which is the Administration for Children and Families, under which is the Office of Head Start and the Office of Child Care. So now you have the Department of Labor, under which is the Employment and Training Administration, under which is the Office of Apprenticeship. Did I get that right? Okay. So that's where we sit, which means Brent's on top of that, right? That's where he sits. In that role, he helps oversee many of the department's workforce development, employment, and unemployment insurance programs, and works to ensure that those programs' investments advance the Biden-Harris administration's workforce and equity priorities. Okay, that's what he's doing now. He's also an expert on workforce, labor and career, and technical education policies. And when I first met him, which was in about 2017-ish, he was the deputy director of the Center on Education and Labor at New America, which is a bipartisan policy and research institution based in D.C. In that capacity, Brent worked closely with California, among other things, this isn't the only thing he did, but in terms of us, he worked closely with California state and local leaders, philanthropy, business, and labor to move the dial on expanding apprenticeships in California and really building out a system so we could build apprenticeships. With a particular focus on new and emerging industries like ECE. And the article that's called Advancing Apprenticeship Work in California, a 5-point plan that's in your packet, a lot of his voice and his efforts are reflected in that piece of paper. Several pieces of paper. Okay, but that's the formal part. I first came to know Brent when he was doing. Oh, I highlighted, never mind, I got to start again. This is where we're going to splice the video. I first came to know Brent through his work around defining, creating, and putting on the map the notion of youth apprenticeship, which led to the establishment in 2017 of New America's Partnership to Advance Youth Apprenticeship, which is called PAYA. And it was a national, and it continues to be, a national initiative to support states and cities across the U.S. to connect high school students to apprenticeship opportunities. Now, I don't know if it's true. In my mind, Brent was the architect and the voice and the face of this thing, and it has gotten bigger and broader, but he played a really critical role. ECEPTS was one of the inaugural grantee within the inaugural group of PAYA grantees back in 2018. And at the time, there were 8 grantees, and we represented the only one focused on ECE or on education more broadly. So it was very significant, particularly back then when we barely knew what we were doing and we weren't doing that much, that Brent had the commitment and the foresight to take a chance on us. That's my perspective. He can tell you what his perspective was. And many of you know that I have been very excited that he agreed and was able, in terms of his schedule, to be able to be here as our keynote speaker. But I'm not sure you know exactly why I'm so excited. So I'm going to share 3 quick stories to tell you. This is the real part of the introduction. The first time I met Brent was in LA. I was living in the Bay Area, and there was this meeting about youth apprenticeship. I had no idea what it meant, but it was in LA. I flew down for the day. I thought I was invited. At that point, I was naive enough to think that when you're invited, there's going to be 12 people in the room. Sometimes that means there's going to be 50 people in the room, but that's okay. So they got me there under false pretenses, but that was okay. And he did a whole presentation, and he was also very articulate, which was impressive, because that's not always the case when you have presenters. But here's what happened. At the end, I must have gone up to ask him a question. I don't remember exactly, but I know what his answer was if we're developing apprenticeships for young people who don't need apprenticeships in order to succeed in college and in accessing career pathways, then we're not building the apprenticeships that we need. Apprenticeships are for the people who don't necessarily have a career pathway or a pathway to college the minute they're born. And so when he said, however he said it, I was like, okay, this guy's making sense. Now we're talking. So that was conversation number 1. Probably a year and a half later, I can't remember exactly, we were in South Carolina, at a big conference of all kinds of youth apprenticeship people from all over the country. And after the people who spoke, who talked about their 8 sectors that they were doing youth apprenticeship in, I went up to one of the speakers and I said, "It's so exciting what you're doing. It was so impressive and I'm so inspired. Have you thought about expanding to include ECE in your work?" And she said, "Why would we do that? You don't pay well." Done, right? So I went over to Brent. By now he was used to me coming over to him. And he could see the smoke in my ears. And I said, "Brent, I am so sick of being in these environments where they talk equity and they talk new and emerging sectors." And then I told him what had happened. He said, "Okay, Randy, calm down. There's not a lot of people who can say that to me and I don't get insulted." He said, and here's what he said, "Just relax and don't let it get to you. Because in 2 to 3 years from now, we're going to be holding this meeting in LA and then we'll show them." And it was like a joke, right? And here we are. And I think it is about 3 years later. And here's the last story. Then he makes this move to DOL. And now all I can think is, I know someone who works for the DOL. So you can see, the whole world is very much through my lens. And so I don't remember where it was, maybe it must have been about a year and a half ago, because we were planning the first conference. I said, "Yeah, maybe someday you'll come and keynote for us." And he said, "Better yet, I'll get you the Secretary of Labor." I said, whoa. I didn't think he was kidding. I mean, I think he was half serious. But meantime, I'm okay, because the thing is, Brent really knows us. And he knows ECEPTS, and he knows early childhood, and he's watched, and he's learned, and he has respected the work we do from the moment I've met him. So that's why I'm so excited. This isn't just having someone here who can represent the government and who can talk about policy or whatever. This is a real ally. So with that, let me introduce to you Brent Parton.
Thank you, Randy. Hello, everyone. Hi. There we go. So a couple things. When you say things in front of Dr. Randy Wolf, be very careful. She thinks about them and they happen much later, but I want to say one thing to kick it off. It's incredibly exciting for me for all the reasons Randy mentioned to be here, because I really have, I feel, been on the ECEPTS journey for years. And I think what's most important about it is I'm passionate about apprenticeship. I've been passionate about apprenticeship. I, of course, sit in a place now, which I'll say a little bit more about, with the National Apprenticeship System. The Office of Apprenticeship is in the Employment and Training Administration. But what's powerful to me about apprenticeship is it's an idea that, it can deliver, but it asks a lot to deliver. I always kind of think about it in the context, it requires 3 revolutions at once. It requires fundamentally rethinking the dignity of work and pathways into work that don't always look like going through a college degree, or don't always look like the hot jobs lists, but how we create pathways, dignified pathways, high quality pathways for so many different workers. And the early care and education sector, to me, is often what I think about when I think about why we need to do apprenticeship, why we need to extend its guarantees. The second revolution it calls for is employers, to fundamentally rethink how talent is built and their role in that, and how they invest in that. And it's this idea that they don't sit back and wait, but they are participants in that. That's a lot. That's a very different paradigm than we're used to. The third thing is education. Particularly in areas like early care and education, we have to rethink how we value learning. Our colleges and our high schools have to value things that are learned, skills that are built beyond the walls of a classroom, and think differently about how we value learning. Those are big asks in our society. But what's most exciting about it all is that it can happen, it can work, and it only happens and it works when there's people like you, Randy, like you, Lisa, Joya, Pam, others in this room, that see it's possible. And so these champions that can stand up, do the work, make those revolutions real. And I want to just recognize that's a big part of how we make those big changes happen, but how we make them happen simultaneously. So I just want to ask for a quick round of applause for you for that. I will say that the ecosystem that people build in this apprenticeship space is how the work is going to get done. And it's a very hard job, because apprenticeship is a really good idea when people hear about it. They don't really know how it works yet. Like, oh, that seems like that's good. The work is so complex, particularly the work and the approach and the way that ECEPTS does it, to work across so many different partners to build high-quality pathways in this sector where it is new, particularly when you care to put equity at the center and make sure, as Randy mentioned, we're building apprenticeships not because we can just build apprenticeships. We're building apprenticeships as an outcome that we want to deliver for workers that have traditionally been left behind. And I think that the challenge before us is how you take a very good idea and a very complex body of work, but how you try to keep it simple for all the different partners involved. Several of us were in a room earlier talking about what's easy and what's hard in this work, or what, maybe I exaggerated by saying easy. What are opportunities and what the challenges are? And it's just so empowering to hear, on one hand, how this work is forcing these cross-systems conversations. But on the other hand, that's so challenging, that's so hard. And so in addition to thanking ECEPTS and Randy, I thank you all for being here, for jumping in, for being sparked by a good idea, but being willing and committed to recognize it's gonna be hard work to do it right. So thank you for everything you do. I really mean that. So I will take just a few minutes to level set, in addition to sort of my passion for this work, to talk about why this effort, why what ECEPTS has built is so important for what the goals of this administration are trying to move when it comes to economic opportunity, mobility, equity, and workforce development. The Employment and Training Administration is a large agency. It oversees about northwards of $3 to $4 billion a year flow into our workforce development systems through a lot of different channels that you might bump into in your communities or really work hard to get access to. But what's so important about what we're trying to do is say, while there's always going to be different funding streams, different programs, different bureaucracies, whether it's the Office of Apprenticeship, the programs that are governed under the Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act, or WIOA, which is the state and federal workforce system that is within the ETA domain, whether it's our Job Corps centers or our discretionary grants that include community colleges and community-based organizations. We're working really hard right now to center the work on some really core principles and objectives to meet the moment in our labor market. And I just want to spend a few minutes talking about what that is, and I hope as I'm doing that, it's very clear that the work that you're doing every day and the work that ECEPTS is doing is at the center of what this vision's about. First is fairly basic, but so important, and it's a grounding principle for us, which is equity. It's been a challenging few years for communities. It's been a challenging few years for workers. It's been a challenging few years for our young people and our children. Coming out of a pandemic, recognizing on one hand that it exacerbated structural inequities within our labor market, within education, but at the same time, coming out of it to recognize we don't have to go back to where things were. There's a tight labor market. Employers are thinking about diversity, equity, inclusion, at least thinking about them in productive ways. How do we tap into the energy of the moment? And for us at the Department of Labor, no matter if it's a grant-funded program, a policy that we put out, or how we engage in the expansion of apprenticeship programs, for us the question is always, is this going to deliver on our equity mission? Equity for us is how we design programs and how we build things in terms of supportive services, in terms of the types of training and offered, in terms of where we go in our communities. But equity is an outcome for us. And that's something that comes from the top of the administration down. What good looks like to us is not if we are just serving more people, but are we disrupting systemic barriers in our society? Not just looking at, are we getting people into jobs? Are we breaking structural barriers, occupational segregation, those types of issues? And for us, that is something that is a challenge. It is something that we recognize takes hard work, but most importantly, it takes partnership, listening to the voices of folks that are doing the work in the communities right beside us, using our funds where we can. That's a grounding principle. This is not going to be a challenging room to sell on that mission, because I know it's in your DNA. The next piece of this, though, is how we get at it. And very much the organizing principle of what we do is around partnerships. That sounds simple. That's, again, what you do every day. But for us, it means a lot right now in this moment, because there's a lot of federal investment out there. There's a lot of opportunity in the labor market we're in. So how are we creating a framework where partnerships are possible, not just across the public and private sector, although that's critical, which is why we are all in on expanding apprenticeships, but how are partnerships possible across federal agencies to enable work on the ground, to align and to make sure that we're not getting in the way of innovative work that works across systems? How are partnerships possible from the federal, state to the local? And these are key things that for us, I will say, are issues that we have not examined in the way that has needed to from where we sit in the federal level, is that while we have a lot of ability and there's a lot of resources out there, we have to do the job to enable cross-sector partnerships. We have to do a job at the federal level to outreach to private sector organizations that have affiliates at the local level. We've launched partnerships with national civil rights groups and organizations, in part just basically to enable and open up access to the types of funding streams that we provided access for. We're also working closely with our federal agencies. Of course, when you look at all the investment coming from, whether that's the CARES Act and the funds that have come out from Treasury and others into our communities, but also with the federal investment from the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law, from the CHIPS and Science Act, from the Inflation Reduction Act, that are impacting a range and multitude of industry sectors. We are working closely with other federal agencies to try to make the most of ensuring wheels aren't being reinvented, cross-sector partnerships are possible on the ground. Now, you might ask, as we do, what role we're playing in a lot of these types of federal investments that are coming out of agencies like the Department of Transportation, like the Department of Commerce, and like the Department of Energy. And I would say those dollars did not come to the Department of Labor. Too bad. Those dollars, though, you might also ask, how does this impact our field of early care and education? And what I can say is this administration is very clear-eyed that while the Investing in America vision, which is the broader vision the president has for how these investments will land in communities, create opportunities, and drive equity, is one not just about the jobs in the sectors, whether that's clean energy, advanced manufacturing, construction, and more. It's not just about those jobs. We have said multiple times, and when you look at the investments that we are making at the Department of Labor from a workforce standpoint, none of those sectors will work. None of those jobs will be accessible to women or underrepresented populations if we don't also invest in our care economy. There's been really important strides made to send those messages. Obviously, the Department of Commerce and what Secretary Raimondo has done about mandating that manufacturers that receive CHIPS funds have to set aside funds to support early care and education is important. But there's, again, big ideas can get complex in implementation. The challenge to us is how do we make them simple to execute and deliver? And that is something the Department of Labor is doing every day, working with those other federal agencies. It's something we're committed to not taking our foot off the gas on, but we're gonna need really strong partners like intermediaries, like ECEPTS to make that real and make it happen on the ground. Because we all know, as much as that there's challenges being talked about in the workforce for where are we gonna find the future manufacturing workforce, where are we gonna find the next generation of construction workers and building trades, we know that same question, the answer to those questions, and those same questions are being asked is, how do we build a stronger care sector and an early care sector that has good jobs, access to pathways for the populations that need them, but more importantly, to create access to those services to enable the underrepresented workers and women to get into those high-paying jobs in those other sectors. That is a core challenge for us that we are working on, which is why the third part of the bucket is about building a better care economy. We cannot build and invest in America without building a better care economy. If we hadn't learned from the pandemic and the response that a functioning labor market demands a functioning care economy with robust access to quality child care, with robust access to direct care and long-term care, workers will not be able to access other types of training opportunities and jobs, and we will not have the types of quality education that our future generations need to be the next generation of talent in this country and lead us into the future. So building a better care economy, I have to tell you, is something that we get questions a lot about. They're saying, well, why are you focused on the care economy? And what I will say to you is that as the workforce development, de facto workforce development agency within the federal government, if we don't consider access to care as a core supportive service for how we serve workers in our economy, we're not doing our job. And if we're not building up a quality early care and education workforce, if we're not building a direct care workforce up in our communities through our workforce development efforts, we are also not doing our job. And so while we will always get pushback and questions, and I know all of you have had those in your communities before, like you had in South Carolina, I can guarantee you that you have the commitment from the Employment and Training Administration, the U.S. Department of Labor, Acting Secretary Julie Su, that we are going to stay focused and trained on the care economy, because we think the job, that when you look at where these jobs are today, it's not where they have to be for the future. And there's really incredible innovative work going on the ground every day that we should be investing in and engaging in. Which brings me to the last point and the last organizing principle of what we do, which is taking action now for the future of work. When we talk about that, people think we're talking about gadgets and technology. It's not. And I think I'd look at the core of what the ECEPTS program is, and again, I see this. There's a lot of discussion right now about how do we make workforce development training quicker, faster, and just more modularized. The reality is that when we know what works, if we look at long-term outcomes, workers in our economy need two things. Yes, they need the technical skills, the experience, and the networks to succeed in the near term. They also need the core foundational skills that gives them a foundation to be adaptable, to advance in new pathways. And what the apprenticeships are doing in ECEPTS is creating that foundation, that entry point, that offer a lot of different ways to progress. That is a microcosm for where our workforce development system needs to go. Yes, we need short-term certifications for certain things. Yes, we need licenses to get access to jobs in the labor market. But if we're not integrating basic foundational education, whether that's English as a second language, whether that's adult basic education programs, whether those are foundational programs that give foundational education that gives them the ability to pursue not only a certification, but an associate's degree and a BA and beyond, we're not doing service for workers in their long run. And that has always been at the core of what ECEPTS is about, is how does it create that foundation where people will always have the ability to participate and take the off-ramp where they need it, but there's always an opportunity to progress. That takes foundational, hard, complex work, aligning programs, aligning degrees, that ECEPTS is really a national model for. So now when people ask me, what the hell do you mean about the future of work? I just say ECEPTS. Uh-oh. I did not learn my lesson. So these four principles, you will hear us say them time and again. It's going to take time to turn the ship that is federal investment in workforce development. We are working closely with the Department of Education and a number of federal agencies to orient our systems around equity, facilitate cross-sector and cross-governmental partnerships, to be making sure that we're integrating and building up a stronger care economy for what we do, because it's core to the rest of our economic sectors, and preparing people for opportunities today to be resilient and for a future of work. All that is hard work unto itself. And you might be asking, so what are you doing to make it real? And for the purposes of not keeping you here for 6 hours, what I am going to say is apprenticeship is one of the things that's at the center of that. And so I just want to spend a couple more minutes talking about why and how apprenticeship has been a centering principle on this work, and why, in my view, echoes a lot about why ECEPTS' broader mission for what it means to support workers and support this sector has leveraged the apprenticeship model to get it done. We have put significant resources towards expanding apprenticeships. I'm in California, so it sounds less significant than what Adele gets to play with maybe sometimes. But we have put $300 million already out. There will be another $200 million out in this administration alone. It's important to recognize the federal government just started putting money into apprenticeship in 2015. So the idea that the federal government has taken a compelling interest in the registered apprenticeship system to expand it and diversify it doesn't sound revolutionary, but it is new. And I think that's something we should all recognize when the work gets hard, is that we're still early stages on some of this stuff. Been at it for years, not decades. And when we look at 5, 6, 7 years of investment, I can tell you that what we're trying to achieve is move from showing what's possible to trying to create an ecosystem around apprenticeship that can be supportive of non-traditional sectors, non-traditional actors, but be centered not just on measuring, did we get more apprenticeships and apprentices, which today, the only metric, the only technical performance metric in the National Registered Apprenticeship System is active apprentices. Why are we not asking who those apprentices are? Why are we not asking what happens to them after the apprenticeship? Why are we not asking what types of outcomes are they having for their communities? This is a broader, small piece, but a much broader piece of what it will mean for us to catch up now with what the field has been able to seed and show what's possible. So on one hand, we can claim, when we start saying that's what matters to success, resources can follow, policy can follow. And so while we're putting money out there, the administration, through its Apprenticeship Building America investment framework, is trying to move away from here's a grant, to a more consistent investment framework where equity is a clear funding stream and mechanism to support supportive services, not just to get people into apprenticeships, to retain them into apprenticeships toward completion. We are investing in youth apprenticeships to make sure we're making very fluid connections to our high schools, because that's where the most diverse generation of Americans are. That's where the opportunities need to be. We are investing in states to try to help them provide consistent resources to build their capacity to be a part of the national mission, which you don't have a problem with here in California, but it's something we are pushing to say it is not just enough to operate an apprenticeship system. We need to expand it into more industry sectors, expand the guarantees of registered apprenticeship that are so tried and true to more workers and more sectors of our economy. And we need to assess our success based on who's getting access to those opportunities and the results we're delivering. That is a big body of work, but it's a work we're investing in. There is a very technical, important thing on the national regulatory agenda that we're advancing, a apprenticeship modernization regulation to make sure that the apprenticeship system catches up with these ideas. And we have an apprenticeship advisory committee that Randy is a part of that is actively debating the tensions and challenges within these issues. And if you really, really have nothing to do next week, it's a public meeting in Chicago. You can stream it online. Randy will be there holding the banner for ECEPTS and the ECE work. I want to kind of close my piece by saying just real quickly and this is not to validate the work alone of what ECEPTS does, because I'm not someone who needs to validate it. I'm someone who gets to admire it, because it's a model for what building those apprenticeship ecosystems are. We all know this. Workforce development and apprenticeship is always place-based. It happens in communities. It happens organically, where you have the partners that can come together and make these partnerships work. Whether that's community-based organizations, high schools, community colleges, they make it happen. And I know you see that in the ECEPTS model and framework, is that it's about supporting communities across a region to build these partnerships. But you also need support. And it goes back to this issue of apprenticeship's a really good idea to bring people around a table for. It's incredibly complex to pull it off. But with the right support, with the right connections to other communities that are doing it, with the right experts who know the industry sector that they are working in, with the tools and templates that not every community has to reinvent the wheel and start over, with clarity about how you can leverage various forms of federal, state, and local funding, the complex starts to become possible. And so this model of investing in intermediaries, and I think that's a word that gets thrown around a lot, is an area where we are trying to very actively create an investment framework where we are funding place-based partners, but we are always trying to find ways to support industry sector experts, groups like ECEPTS that can work across, link, support, and enable local partnerships to get the work done. You could call it train the trainer sometimes if you want, because the idea is to build sustainable local ecosystems. But I think it's more enduring than that. You know, the work is going to grow and scale over time because it does work. It does work when it comes together, despite the challenges it gets pulled off. But having that consistent connection and truly building a field is an incredibly powerful thing. For those of you who have done work, obviously in education and workforce, in childcare for some time, you know how important field building is. And that's what it is. Now, that's very hard to sell to Congress. We can tell them grants and what they serve. It'll always look like that. But it's really critically important for you to know that the ECEPTS model of linking community action with expertise, support, and partnership with organizations that can work across communities and connect them, that's how we get this done. So thank you for being here. It's exciting to be here with you and see how much this has grown. Yes, it did happen. I'll work on the Secretary of Labor thing. But for now, I really appreciate the time and happy to take any questions. What's that? Oh, I got this. Thanks.
Yeah, did you turn that on? Okay, now come on this side. If you have questions, go ahead and raise your hand. We'll come to you.
Thank you for that lovely talk. That was awesome. So I'm a community college faculty in early childhood, and I hear this word a lot, quality early childhood care. What do you mean by that?
This is the wrong room to ask me that question. Who wants to take that? I'll put it this way. I don't know. I'm not the expert at that, but here's what I do know. You need well-qualified, we need to work on well-compensated people who are doing the work, people who know the communities, people who have had lived experience. I mean, seen so many examples where you've seen parents of programs become part of these programs. Building a high-quality workforce, for me, is about what the experts and the practitioners in the industry and the sector know it. The Department of Labor is not in the business of setting qualifications for what good looks like. The Department of Labor is about recognizing where the right set of partners have come together. They've built high-quality training programs. Now, that's something I do know, and what I will say is, if we are asking people to take out debt to get the qualifications, to get a degree, if we are asking people to work for free in practicums, that's not a quality training pathway to me. So if we want people with experience, if we want equitable access, apprenticeship is earn and learn. It's structured. It's built on standards set by the people in the industry who know what good looks like. But most importantly, it's about taking the burden off the backs of workers to navigate these pathways and trying to create a supportive ecosystem that opens up these opportunities to more workers. To me, that's good.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Good afternoon. I have a comment and then a question. Actually, I'll give you the question first. You can answer that. We need updated work SOC codes that really define our industry, not just in early childhood, but transitional kindergarten, there's no code for a new TK teacher. After-school care, family child care is invisible in the coding. And for those of us that do a lot of data work, we need the codes to show both the labor market demands as well as the vacancies and whether we're addressing particular job types. So that's my question. And then a comment is that in the San Francisco Bay region, we have prioritized both the care economy, preschool teachers, teachers working with young children, but also are working to address teacher shortages at higher levels. And the part I think that would, resonate with you is that many of our community colleges and our high schools have severe shortages in career technical ed teachers, so much so that they cannot offer the programs that labor market data says we need in our region because we cannot find a teacher. We did a report around the absence of nursing teachers. Can't find any. So programs have shut down. And I could go on with what the high needs are. But I'd like to encourage thinking of the care economy as part of the education continuum. And we need teachers at all levels. And we need to both fight for them and further describe their, importance as infrastructure in this plan. If we don't have good teachers at all levels, we don't move forward.
Totally
So-
agree. Yeah. No, I will. There's no doubt about that, and I will be clear. The administration's been ambitious, rightfully so, on recognizing that there's a lot of problems to tackle at once, and the crisis in teaching is one that actually the apprenticeship model has gained significant momentum in. About 6 months ago, there were 2 states in the United States that had a K-12 teacher apprenticeship program. Today, there are 17. And the reason is simple, the need. Now, lots of details, again, go into that. But there's a lot of innovation happening at district levels within states because of that issue. And actually, nursing is an area where we just recently have been able to invest $80 million in nursing pathways, which usually at the Department of Labor, we fund training, pure and simple. That's what we do. The pot of money we used is from H-1B visas. We receive a percentage of those to invest in training. So that has to be for H-1B occupations, of which nursing is one. But for the first time ever, we're actually funding the instructors because that's the bottleneck. And we've heard that from nursing associations. We've heard that from hospital systems and health providers. So it's all hands on deck across these areas. And I would say apprenticeship continues to be an organizing principle, but we've got to use all the tools we have. And hear you loud and clear on the SOC code piece. I will say that is an area, I'll throw a paper airplane to the Bureau of Labor Statistics down the street on that one for you. But no, I understand. Appreciate it.
Do I have it? Okay. Hi, how are you?
Good. How are you?
Good, good. I was almost amen over here on your equity piece, but I want to ask around the equity piece. Part of what you said was that childcare is around providing supportive services. And we know that childcare was built on the legacy of racism, when it was domestic work and work done by women, and primarily women of color. And then if I think about who I am as a Black woman, enslaved women did it for free. Yep. And so my question is around that equity piece and marrying good jobs. How do we build in wages and not looking at us subsidizing the government for something they see as essential and important, but paying us what we're worth? We're very skilled, we're very competent. You have many folks in here with professional development, AA degrees, BA degrees, Dr. Joya, doctorate degrees. Like, this is our love.
Yeah.
So we've done this, but yet the compensation hasn't followed our skilled work. So in that piece around your four or five core principles, are wages a part of that compensation? Because we're losing them to other work. It's dignified work, so I won't put any kind of work down. But when you can go make $20 an hour working in the restaurant industry and get education assistance, but yet in our field, some of us, depending on what state you live in, are earning as low as $13, $22 an hour.
Yeah.
And we're leaving for other dignified work. And many of us are mothers too, and some of us single parents trying to do this work. So does it pay? And I just want to know from being from the U.S. Department of Labor, how does wages fit into this? Because we need to get paid.
Yeah. So you asked the right federal agency to find an ally on that, and I'll put it this way. Anyone who doesn't recognize that the challenge in this sector is because the work has not been valued for what it is and pays not just a family-sustaining wage, a dignified wage is what I would call it, a true living wage, and is missing the point. And I will tell you that the Department of Labor, there's two organizing principles for how not just our past secretary, Marty Walsh, but our current acting secretary, Julie Sue, who you might know well from California, think about work. It's equity and job quality, and they go hand in hand. You can't have true equity without job quality, and you can't have true job quality without equity. And I will tell you, you don't have a bigger advocate for how we fight to get recognition of wages as the core systemic issue for not just early care and education, but the care economy as a whole. I will say that the administration had some very bold ideas as part of the earlier Build Back Better package that was going to put really critical resources on the ground. And I think what we can all mourn together is the first part of the package around the infrastructure and that gate got through, and the other part did not. And that's a tragedy. And I will tell you, the administration, the First Lady, the Vice President are all very much out there and talking about this wherever they go. You have powerful models of joint labor management partnerships that show you it works when you pay these workers. It works to recruit them. It works to retain them. So we have proof points. In many communities or cities that have stepped up and paid the bill because it's the right thing for their community, they have a very positive ecosystem. So I think promoting those types of models is important. And here's what I'll say after that. What I don't want, and what makes me very passionate about the work that ECEPTS does, is I never want that to be an excuse to ignore the sector in conversations about how we support workforce and economic development. And that's a tightrope. I get it. That's hard. We walk it all the time in this work. Randy knows that. All of you know that. The idea that someone can shut you down by saying you don't pay enough is the wrong conversation to be having. And it's a missed opportunity for advocates. And I think that's the critical part of this work, is that when people see the work, when they realize, oh, I can engage, it's a registered apprenticeship program, those issues become, well, what's going to take to scale it? How do we grow it? Now you've built a community of advocates that were not there before, not just people that wanted to ignore the issue. And I think that's key.
I have a question and a request. So I, until very recently, worked in state government within our child care program in the state, and we're getting lots of great messages from the feds, from like ACF, about apprenticeship, and like really lots of encouragement to explore this model. So I'm curious, from the perspective of the Department of Labor, how are you all communicating with the state labor agencies to let them to signal like how important early childhood is, and that so when we go to our state agents, our labor agency, they're like, early childhood, that's what, they're still very focused on the trades and construction. So what have you done? What more could you do to help get that message out to all the states about how important this sector is? And in some of the upcoming funding opportunities you mentioned, are there specific opportunities to direct funds for early childhood specific apprentice programs?
Can I start with the second question because it's easier first? Yes. So there's a current, actually, a funding opportunity that I think might have just closed, but it was what I was talking about earlier about funding intermediaries nationally. It's due in 2 weeks. Not that anyone's tracking, right? We called out early care. Previously, this has been manufacturing, IT, cybersecurity. We've done some transportation logistics. We're continuing to do that and grow it, but we've called out care, and we've called out early childhood care in it. So that's one thing, is to actually fund stuff. Now, as glorious it is to sit where I sit, I don't get to pick who we get money for, but we can set it as a priority in our investment. So that's one way we're doing it. So that's one funding opportunity. Later this fall, the next round of Apprenticeship Building America grants, which fund equity. There's a whole line of funding on equity in apprenticeship. There's a whole line of funding around youth in apprenticeship. And there's a line in funding called apprenticeship hubs, which are to support regional ecosystems focused on growing apprenticeships in sectors. We will emphasize early care and education again. So yes, one is money. The second thing is creating platforms for it. The government doesn't create apprenticeships. We can say where there's opportunities, but most importantly, we have to point to success where those programs are created. And every opportunity we get, we have to elevate where that has happened. I did not pick who's on the Secretary's Advisory Committee on Apprenticeship. It's 1/3 labor, 1/3 industry, 1/3 public, and it's 30 members. Randy's on it. Our partners at the Healthcare Advancement Program, who also do work in early care and education, they are on it. There are 2 voices for early care and education on the national apprenticeship conversation. So I think that's key to create those spaces. The last thing that I will say is we, in terms of the state issue, I think states are, and there's certainly state-to-state issues, but states are there on wanting to look for ways to expand apprenticeship, but they have the same problem we do. They need partners that can put it together and run it and recognize it. So we can push, we can elevate, we can call out, but you need those proof points to really drive the action. And that when people can see it, that matters. And so I know that's a little bit of chicken and egg, but that's a really critical part of how you build this field. There's people here I know not from California. Having a national conversation on this, creating spaces to do that is really critically important.
Okay, and I've got the mic. So there you go. Hello, I appreciate your, my name is Adora Fisher. I'm with Santa Clara County Office of Ed. I appreciate.
I was born in Santa Clara County.
All right. And probably educated there too, right? Yeah. I appreciate your answers and the things you said to us. But the reality is, in my mind, that at your level, the federal level, the only real thing you have control over is legislation and policy. And we all know that legislation and policy makes change because we are experiencing it now. And so my question is, why don't we have, coming from the feds, multi-departmental legislation that includes the sectors that you just mentioned, that includes education, that includes health and wellness, health and human services? Why are we seeing legislation that addresses all aspects of early childhood education through college, 0 through 22, 24, and beyond, including apprenticeships, and every aspect, so that we are creating systems that address whole children and whole families? The piecemeal legislation we're getting, on the ground, we try to cobble it together and create partnerships, right? And those partnerships are working in silos in their own legislative nightmares, right? And so here we are trying to braid together funds and blend together programs that were never meant to be blended or braided, right? And yet the reporting systems on the other side of that are all separate. I'm not understanding why we can't get departmental legislation and policy that addresses a whole program and situation. I just don't get it.
No. Well, I'm going to answer that 2 ways. One, I'm with you because if we could control legislation, that would be exciting. Unfortunately, those people in Congress, absolutely. And so what I'm going to say is, I think things that for example, the investments that were proposed as part of the Build Back Better agenda that had a pretty significant investment, a historic investment in early care and education, was something that we, the White House, the Department of Health and Human Services, all had pens on. And apprenticeship was elevated within that. That was a powerful moment. Now, the politics of Congress meant it didn't move. But you're right. we push, we advocate, we develop those frameworks. The question then becomes, or the challenge, which is an important one that you're issuing, is what do we do with the existing authorities and resources we have when we can't change the policies per se? What can we change? And I would say the area we can change is really breaking down the barriers that don't have to exist based on the laws that are written. Because we don't get to write the laws, but we certainly work on the regulations. But most importantly, we work with our states and locals who implement those regulations. One of the most powerful things that I think we can do, and it was something that actually we were having a conversation with in there, is when it comes to navigating all these programs and funding streams that many of you are doing, and it's incredibly frustrating, sometimes we think we're getting no's to something because it's in the law, when it's not. It might be an interpretation or just kind of how we've done things in this community using these funds. It might be a myth about how those resources can be used. That is something on us. That is something on us to work with our federal partners like HHS. And it's something I think about, particularly even coming out of today. How do we help enable and create real clear frameworks for how this good work can happen across those funding streams and across those sectors in the world we're in right now? So we have to advocate for changes and push on new investments and new ways to create the types of partnerships and ecosystems you want, but we shouldn't wait for that to happen. And I will tell you, our secretary has, for example, those of you that do work with the WIOA space, has launched a campaign called Yes, We Owe a Can. And the idea is to really break down myths and find a way to yes in the current context instead of just doing things how they've been. Now, there's always going to be barriers, but I think the most important thing that you're all doing on the ground is pushing on the right questions. What can we do to make that more possible and automatic? How do we provide clearer guidance and support and technical assistance to our state and local partners that you're engaging with every day to make these cross partnerships possible? So it's not just dependent on can we get the big change in now? What can we do in the interim too with what we have? And that should not be on heroic actions like many of you that are out there working with partners. The last thing I want to just say real quick is, in addition to myself, there's a couple of other people in this room from the Department of Labor. One of them is the Chief of Staff at the Employment Training Administration, Anna Hajay. All remaining challenging questions should go to her. And the second person is Annie Leonetti. Annie, wave your hand. You're going to like this one. She is from our regional office in San Francisco, so she is our Yes, We Owe a Can czar. And what I mean by that is she works and leads a group of a team that oversees that supports and engages and provides oversight to all of our grantees, whether those are state and local governments, discretionary grantees. And Annie's an incredible person, has done innovative work at all levels. If you don't know Annie yet and you're doing work in California, come find Annie. I think that's what we have time for, but yeah? Randy, you can't ask a question. I probably shouldn't, but I can say this.
I don't know what I asked you. You tell them whatever you want.
To that point, keep your eyes peeled. The administration is recognizing that we didn't get the transformative change in the near term with Congress on the care initiatives within Build Back Better, is working very closely, and so there's not a lot I can say about it, specifically yet, but for support cross-government action with existing authorities that are within the authorities of the president. Those are often through things that rhyme with negative ordered things, but that's what I'll say for now. And I just want to say that we acknowledge that we can't wait and that we really do have to enable that cross-agency action. So stay tuned on that. Otherwise, my bubbling answer would be a lot more direct. Great. Let's end there.